good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be here. I'm Saikat Chaudhuri. I'm the Executive Director of the Mack Institute for Innovation Management at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and a professor in the Management Department. And I'm very excited about the topic we have in our panel discussion today. You know, we hear all about these wonderful, emerging, novel technologies all around us all the time. Artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, AR, VR, big data analytics, robotics, drones, the list simply goes on. But what's most powerful about these technologies is the innovations that they can enable in order to help us solve some of the most pressing problems in the world and reshape industries. And that's the topic that we will explore with our eminent panelists here. Let me first introduce them, and I'd like you to hold your applause until I've introduced all four, and then we should just give them a round of applause. It's wonderful they've taken time out of their busy schedules here in Davos to actually join us here. So to my left, we have Sanjay Poonen. Sanjay is the COO of VMware. Then we have Thomas Saueressig, who is an executive board member at SAP, responsible for product engineering. We have Karen Quintos, who's the chief customer officer at Dell Technologies. And then Kalyan Kumar, who is the CTO of HCL Technologies, also fondly known as KK, so I'll refer to him as such as well. We're looking for a very lively discussion today, and the format that we've selected to have it be both engaging and insightful is that I've asked each of the panelists to first just spend 2 minutes thinking about the topic we have on hand, namely both what are some of the innovations that all these cool emerging technologies can give us over the next decade, but also how might we get there? It may not be an easy path ahead. And then after that, what I will do is I'll ask the panelists some questions. Subsequent to that, we'll take a few questions from you, and then we'll wrap it up. So it should be an action-packed hour. I'm very much looking forward to it. One minor disclaimer on my end, you can hear it a little bit in my voice as well. I've caught a little bit of a cold despite the wonderful climate change-induced weather here. And so I might, clear my throat every once in a while, and I hope I can avoid a cough. But forgive me, it's not meant to be any kind of signal to our panelists that I'm getting impatient or anything like that. So that's the main reason for putting it out there. All right, Sanjay, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on what's to come over the next decade?
Thank you for hosting us, and great to see all of you. Again, I was last year in the same spot, and delighted to see many familiar faces. I think when you look at the future, and I think we're at the turn of a decade, it's always good to ask ourselves, we were sitting here 10 years from now in 2030, what would we be proud of the world accomplishing beyond just our technology platforms? And I think one way to look at the future, as was famously said, is look at the past and ask ourselves, what were people proud of? I think a couple of things which are less so about enterprise and B2B, but maybe in people's lives. If you look back at the 1990s, I was coming out of college, and my first job in the healthcare world, the big breakthrough was HIV. It allowed people like Magic Johnson to live and have a career, and which was an incredible moment. I still remember that time when he was able to continue playing, and as a big basketball player, play in the Olympics. And there were people who thought if you touched him, you would get HIV, and that was a myth. But he's able to now live a full life, and that's incredible. You fast forward in the 2000s, what do I think about in 2000, 2010? The iPhone, 2007. 2010 and 2020, I can't really think about anything that's so breakthrough. People are, talking about potential, but in our world, probably the biggest advent is cloud computing. And that's been huge for perhaps a different audience, the B2B world. And so if I look into the next 10 years, I would love to see, we've always been talking about driverless cars, but it's not become mainstream. I hope it becomes something that affects every car. And even if you weren't comfortable driving a car on the freeway, I'm not yet at the point where I'm completely comfortable letting go of my wheels in a driverless car on the Autobahn, which is the extreme point of trust. But if you've ever seen me park, I'm a terrible parker. My wife and my children make fun of me. If you study parking, it's all geometry and cameras, and it should be done better by a driverless car. Stop and go traffic is likely the place people fall tired. And if you're going to have an accident, a lot of accidents have to happen. Those are two areas where I think driverless cars make complete sense. So my hope is that driverless cars become a fact in every car manufactured in every country, every brand, and we're able to trust it, even if it isn't for freeway driving. I think in healthcare, my hope is that there's 2 or 3 diseases that are, I think, still fundamentally not solved: Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and certain forms of internal cancer. I'm hoping by 2030, and these are gone, technology are going to help both of these areas. I think it will both save lives and make our lives significantly more efficient. So those are some of my hopes. And our goal is, to the extent that any of what we're doing can help facilitate that, the world's a better place.
Thanks, Sanjay. Thomas, your thoughts from the SAP perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think technology is something which is at hand. We talk about AI, you mentioned it, it's there. I mean, this is nothing in the new, that's the new norm which we have. But I believe it's now really the time also how to leverage technology for the application purposes to really drive something good. What I mean with that, I mean, we are in the World Economic Forum, and I think the topic of the week is basically sustainability. And I also deeply believe that actually the biggest topic of our times, and I believe even the biggest challenge of all times, is climate change. But I do fundamentally believe that technology can actually help to reduce carbon emissions in the world. And we see that, and we can improve that. If you think about topics like, if you plan better the demand you have in your companies to reduce inventory levels, if you better structure the entire value chain end-to-end with your suppliers to really get into a circular economy, these are all topics which can be supported by technology. And that's fundamentally why I believe we need to focus big time for the next decade. And that's also the reason why I fully sign up to the word that actually the decade to come is called the decade of action. And that's something we need to start now, really making the change. From an SAP perspective, we're committed to really drive the change. If you think about our application portfolio, we want to extend it end-to-end, that throughout the entire value chain, end-to-end supply chains, that we embed the carbon footprint into all the processes. That fundamentally you are enabled to actually optimize the business processes, not just by financial terms. In the last couple of decades, everybody only talked about the top line and the bottom line of the company. And I think that's for sure where also business software helped to drive that, if you see the scale of the companies we now see in the world. But I believe it's time to embed the third dimension, to the top line and the bottom line, at the dimension about sustainability. Let's call it for a second green line, which we actually should invent. But I also do believe technology is something which is the one thing. But I want to also place one thought in this audience is about us, about the people. Because in the end of the day, technology is good, but people make it work. If you think about all the business cases in your company, you always get the question, what is the TCO or what is the return on investment? Did you ever ask yourself, how did you reduce the carbon footprint by that project? Is that part of your decision-making process? And should we also adhere this third dimension about sustainability in all of our business activities and decisions? And we need to challenge ourselves. I, for myself, also the last years, always looked only on these dimensions. And that's the reason, let's make use out of that for the greater purpose. And we will significantly invest into the sustainable enterprise business software which we want to deliver. And the second topic, which is dear to my heart, where I believe in this world where actually technology is changing so rapidly, we also see the need for different education, knowledge, and training and enablement of the people. And if you think about all sitting here, everybody has a smartphone. Everybody is very quick in getting information, sharing information. The world changed significantly the last 10 years with everything what we saw. We see the same need for digital skills, because I fundamentally believe that actually digital literacy is actually like the alphabet of today. It's the foundation of the future success. And I believe with new models like using modern technologies like smartphones and everything else, how to educate and keep constantly up to date with changing demands. This is also something where we need to have technology with all what we have to make use out of that to really broaden the perspective on education. So these are, in my perspective, the two big topics where we need to take care, and where I believe it's really the moment of time to go big time into that.
Thanks, Thomas. Very fundamental existential questions also. Karen, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree a lot with what these panelists said. I'm super optimistic about the next decade and what technology can do. If you think about the last decade and the role that technology has played around reducing poverty levels, access to education, increases in the life expectancy of humans around the world, I think there's just so much more hope and optimism on what the next decade can do. I think one of the challenges, though, is the pace of change. And all of what Thomas talked about is some of the societal, cultural, reskilling challenges that this fast-growing technology is going to provide. So I'll give you one recent example. I was with a leading cancer institution about a month or so ago, and cutting edge, really thinking about personalized medicine. We've seen all of what technology has been able to do to scale the sequencing of the human genome. A lot of these cancer institutions are trying to look at the combination of kind of the clinical as well as the genomic side and how do you transform healthcare. Their single biggest challenge is the keeping the skilling and the education of doctors to keep pace with cancer treatments. And they rattled us some massive statistics. Around 40% of the mammograms that are done in the United States actually don't need to be done because physicians are actually dealing with a standard of care that is 5 years old. So I think there's just a lot of those types of challenges and opportunities. I'm also really positive and optimistic around, I think there's so many business leaders out there today, Michael Dell, one of them, where, business meets purpose. And I applaud a number of other CEOs and other or other public sector leaders and private sector leaders that are finally putting their muscle behind action. And I think with technology and with us coming together, we can solve the world's next set of problems. But we got to think about the cultural and societal challenges that are going to come along with that.
Thanks a lot. Sets us up for the next part as well. KK, what are your thoughts?
I want to take a minute to summarize a couple of key turning points till what I felt happened in each one of till now, till 2020. And each one of the companies here in the panel have been a big inflection point to each one of them. I think today people talk cloud and everything. Go back, what's the underlying piece? It's virtualization, which fundamentally changed the way you looked at everyone is virtualizing, only thing from hardware to desktops to now containers. It's just, but that's a fundamental shift. It changed the way you used and consumed technology, impacted carbon footprint in a way, very important way, because the biggest business case there used to be a time was optimizing power consumption. Dell innovated completely the way servers were commoditized at scale, correct? Today, that one of the reasons people relate Dell to PCs, but it was the server revolution which they really drove it down, computing to a mass scale, which really changed the fundamental. Cheap computing led to creation of cloud capacity, and that's how cloud computing happened. And SAP changed the way you do business. Pretty much every company, one in every second company uses SAP to run business. And you standardize processes, people talk value chain, optimization, everything, but you had to define something somewhere. So I think that is very interesting. I think there's 3 of them, and there are so many such great examples. Sanjay talked about the iPhone. Where I really see 2020 onwards, I think one of the areas which I personally think is this whole cultural aspect which needs to change. Skill, talent, this whole culture, the 2-3 aspects in this. The first is this human-machine partnership. See, there is this, I just came out of this Surviving the 21st Century Congress Hall session, correct? And that was being painted that you've got this technological, obviously there is a risk factor to that there is, and it was Yuval Noah Harari, and he painted a dangerous picture of where the world is going. He made some valid points, but I think I saw the Dutch Prime Minister talking optimistic about some. So I think that we have to learn to find a way of the right balance between human and the machine, and each individual ability to control how much technology you want to consume, correct? So it's very important and that's where the culture aspect, the human aspect, that needs to be really driven on. The second area which I am really optimistic and where I think, and I'm also actively involved in the Global Futures Council on quantum, I think there is a huge potential which I see, and I was in multidisciplinary sessions around biology and other stuff, where computing dynamics stop. I think how can physics, and I think back to the physicist, I think there is some immense new unimaginable. Sanjay gave a couple of examples of finding those cure or approach. I think quantum as computing, as a hybrid computing model combined with the traditional digital computing model has some new potentials to play around, because I think exponential problems like energy, climate, molecular biology, cellular ability to really look through problems, because we live in a quantum world. We don't live in a binary world, because everything around us is in a quantum. So I think I'm pretty optimistic that some fundamental shifts like that in this decade would really accelerate some of the adoption.
Thank you. I think all of you have hit upon some key underlying themes which I find fascinating. I mean, one of them is that there's a sense of optimism. I'm with you in that camp. I also think that we have enough going. The second thing that I observed, which is very fascinating, is that it's not technology per se which is the problem, in the sense that we've already made a lot of advancements in technologies. It's all these other factors, the sociocultural, perhaps regulatory, perhaps geopolitical, but organizational, economic. These are the things which have to come together in some way to make it happen. I'll probe that in a minute as well as the pace of change. And I find that really interesting going in that direction. But one thing I want to just ask before we head into those challenges, one thing that is different about today versus earlier is that we've got multiple technologies simultaneously. You know, earlier we could define them as the internet, for instance, right? Or other developments. Now we've got so many things happening. How do you deal with that? I mean, for me, it seems like there's a combination of technologies that might actually lead us to where we want to be. So, Thomas, maybe you pick up on this theme since you started down this, and I'll get the others involved as well. What are your thoughts on this front?
I think this is actually the exciting piece. The technology is available. It's actually also affordable in the meantime. If you think about AI, I mean, you know, we all know AI was existing years ago. I mean, the origin is far back in the past, but now it's affordable, basically.
Well, you were a kid, you know?
even earlier.
He's the youngest
even earlier.
board member ever, I think, at SAP. Are you millennial or, you know, anyway?
I'm actually...
Anyway, don't mean to interrupt.
I'm actually officially considered a millennial. But if you think about Industry 4.0, which is certainly a combination of, you know, you have IoT, sensor data, which at scale, you combine it with artificial intelligence. So basically, all of this combination is enabling new topics. So if you talk about hyper-personalization, if you talk about really predictive maintenance and all of that topics, where you see all of these technologies come together. And as of today, I mean, if you go to you know, if you want to train a machine learning model or something like that, I mean, quite frankly, this is actually very easily done today. This is not rocket science anymore. That's also the reason why notions like citizen developer and something like that is coming more, because we, as also KK said, we virtualize and have way more abstraction layers in what we do, which is a huge opportunity. What we also sometimes should not forget, actually, and that was an exciting thought I just learned this week. The HPI in the University of Potsdam, they actually analyzed about how much carbon footprint you generate by training one AI training model. Now, perhaps a question in the room. How much do you think in numbers of flights from New York to San Francisco for one AI training model which you train properly? How many flights from New York to San Francisco is it equal? 1,000? No, that's actually not too bad. So it's really 300 flights from New York to San Francisco for one training model. So think about that. And now we all talk about AI at scale and everybody's doing it. Think about that, which means also here, and that's exactly where then, you know, partners like Dell, VMware and others help actually to ensure that we optimize our computing power way more in the future. And these are the things we need to talk about, we need to think about and make it work. But I'm extremely, as you said, positive about that this will lead us to a bright future, actually, and that actually this will help solve these big problems with technology.
What's interesting about what you said, let me just probe on that a little bit, is that it's, you know, we used to be in the business of trying to forecast what's going on, but right now it's more about, you know, seeing what's out there, adapting, adjusting, being on top of it in that way. Is that a correct assessment, or do you still try and forecast the world and then predict where we're going with this, Thomas?
I think the world is certainly extremely volatile and changing very quickly. But I absolutely do believe that every company is actually trying to predict the future. And fundamentally, quite frankly, the best way to predict the future is actually to create it themselves. And this is something where I believe every company is up to actually define it for the future. And what I'm excited is what I see, and I think also here is a great example, that the companies join forces in this. I mean, great partnerships like here, Dell, VMware. This is just phenomenal what we can do together if we come together. And this is something where I see changing today, that we go less about competition, but really about what's the value we jointly can create.
So Karen, how can you work together with Thomas and the other guys? You know, hardware, software, nice combination in order to solve some of these problems.
And HCL, by the way, who's a fantastic partner of Dell Technologies. You know, I think to the point, every CIO that we talk to these days wants, you know, less technology, more integration, candidly, less technology providers, which was part of the vision of bringing Dell Technologies together. they're dealing with all of this complexity, all of this speed, all of those kinds of challenges that are out there. So I think where we can come with a much more integrated view that is much more focused on customer outcomes, the things that they're trying to deliver, joint accountability in delivering those things versus let us come in and sell you, 5,000 servers, if you will. But what are you really trying to do with those types of things from a real outcomes perspective? So I think it's all about simplicity. It's all about less complexity.
Mm-hmm.
It's about coming with an integrated point of view and a set of solutions that really deliver on the customer outcomes and the success that they're trying to deliver.
But Karen, how do we actually incentivize all the different parties in order to work together in that fashion and make things happen? Given how stakeholders, I totally agree, they have to be brought on board. Markets work in particular ways. We know that, though that might be changing. How do we actually incentivize organizations, individuals, different stakeholders to work alongside to create these massive ecosystems?
Well, Sanjay knows this all too well because he and I have been working on this as we've been delivering on the value proposition of Dell Technologies. And one of the biggest pieces of input that we heard from our EMC customers when Dell and EMC came together is, look, I don't want 7 sales teams calling on me. I don't want 7 different points of view. You understand my environment. And we actually changed the incentives in the company to incent more of a integrated go-to-market model.
Yeah.
We've done the same thing with our partners around, there's going to be places where we're going to compete. There's going to be places where we are stronger together. Let's strategically determine where those things are. And how do you look at the capabilities across all organizations to go and do that? And then the third thing I would say, back to the whole point around ESG and all of the conversation that's happening here at Davos, which is incredible, you're starting to see, I believe, a much more focused effort on public sector, private sector coming together to really drive action and impact on some of these big opportunity areas that we have. Dell has been involved with the circular economy in partnership with the World Economic Forum now for about 5 years. I was just at an event late yesterday with the CEO of Philips. We were there. HP was there. There were a number of big brands that were there around how are we going to come together? How have we come together? We're clearly not making progress fast enough, but how do we accelerate that? And the only way you're going to do it is by creating more of these consortium type efforts where there's collective accountability to deliver on what we need to do.
Sanjay, I'll let you have a word here too, since you were referenced, but also you also told us about the past, right? And what can we learn about the past and how do we accelerate things? How do we make them happen? Because we've seen leapfrogging, right? I mean, to me, the biggest ray of hope is if you look at how we revolutionized, for example, telecommunications.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, right? Leapfrogging. The world couldn't have been connected in this way with a traditional landline solution, but we were able to do it through different technology. That's what we need, especially healthcare and all these other examples. What are your thoughts? How do we accelerate the pace of change?
Well, I mean, I think just building on Karen, as you know, Dell has an economic ownership in VMware, so I have no problem partnering with Dell. It's sort of like it's like an arranged marriage.
The
I have no
incentives
choice.
are aligned.
It's an arranged marriage. We have no choice. So some of those are just easy. They just happen because of the governance and governance. So that, and we, as Karen pointed out, it was a very key. But even then, I would say, when EMC acquired VMware in 2004, it's probably one of the best acquisitions. I mean, Joe bought the company for $650 million. VMware is worth today $65 billion. But it was very hard, even within VMware and EMC, to see eye to eye. And that changed a lot, as Karen pointed out, when Michael kind of brought together Dell Technologies. But let's take this case. I spent a significant part of my life at SAP. I knew Thomas very well from my years there. And there's a part of my blood that's still a little bit blue. Indian blue, not German blue. But it's, somewhere in between.
It's by the way 1 decade now.
Yeah, it's been almost 6 years since I left SAP. But, we came in and, I had a point of view as we were looking at our internal ERP system. We were using something else. I knew, because I had worked with tons of customers, that the best ERP system was SAP. And I had to obviously be, a little bit not too biased to driving our CFO in there, but we decided to make that decision to switch to SAP. He had a similar decision that he was thinking about on his side about, the internal data center infrastructure that they were betting in VMware. So there was trust that was built on both sides. And we had a common vision of the world, which is SAP is the largest apps company. We're the largest infrastructure software company. So we're like two ships that are sailing in parallel waters. What if we could just do more together to help a common customer? Because the majority of SAP customers are running on VMware, okay? What are they thinking about? Their future in the cloud, whether it's with their SaaS apps or with our infrastructure. We were being courted very heavily by the big cloud companies, AWS, Azure, Google. So we had some perspective there. And from that was born a very, very seminal partnership. I think the same thing with HCL. From your CEO to KK, we have a common view of the world. We can't partner with every services company in the world. So we prioritize based on what common customers want. And HCL bubbled up to among the top in the list. And we then go and invest to make common customers. So I'll get WhatsApp messages from him when we're close to an escalation or when we could go together to a customer. And, I can think, I don't want to name the customer, but a couple of CPG accounts that we worked on, having us go together with the customer in the middle of it, they want to see more collaboration. There will be competition that exists. I mean, they've got some competitors. I've got some competitors. Dell's got some competitors. You have some competitors, HCL. But when you show collaboration to a customer, they win. And that's, I think, ecosystems at the end of the day are really what the customer wants to see. And that's my advice to you, is put the customer in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And then you can't partner with everybody. I'll give you another example of a big company that we don't have a partnership with just because there's no relevance to it. Facebook. It's a consumer business. They're trying to get in the enterprise, but there's not much intersection between Facebook and VMware. So I could go and spend a lot of time with Cheryl, but it's not going to move the needle in terms of my business. I may as well go and spend time with other enterprise companies that are B2B, right?
Yeah.
So I'd encourage you, as you think about this, prioritize your ecosystem partnerships, double down on the ones that help a customer, and then you'll find it's a beautiful life.
I like that. I like the optimism, all that. But let me push back on this a little bit. I can see how companies in industry work together. I think the interests can be aligned. But in the examples you also cited, healthcare, for example, driverless cars and all of that, governments, regulators, all those things need to fall in place as well. And they're not all on the same page. How do we tackle that problem?
So just very quickly, without getting into all of them, if you go by industry, we've been very involved in helping drive reasonable amount of standardization in 5G with the telco industry, because we think it's good for the industry. And a lot of it happens to also align with our view of the world, which is going to be software defined. 5G gets to completely change the landscape of telco infrastructure with software. Good for them, good for us. Healthcare. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, a significant part of the privacy of and modernization of medical records might be a prep. We're not an AI company ourselves, and we're not going to solve cancer. But to the extent that our infrastructure can make it such that you trust your medical records better, and the infrastructure that somebody else solves that can run on VMware will facilitate that. Governments, GDPR, we watched that happening, and we asked ourselves, listen, is that good for the industry? Probably right, because quite frankly, the reason the European companies are thinking about GDPR is because they're worried that these public clouds are becoming so big that the data is going to be resident outside their countries. So why don't we work with the leading European companies like SAP and the leading European institutions to make some kind of hybrid cloud view of the world, which again helps them, helps us, because VMware plays a hybrid cloud story. And we've now come out with a position that embraces GDPR, which helps our customers. And I think you have to go systematically through each of them. Every industry is different. And in some cases, we would have very little relevance to, because it may not play as a benefit. We'll let other people take the lead. But I think if you drive to certain common principles, which is ecosystems win, standards win, as opposed to proprietary systems, and then look at ways by where the coalition extends beyond B2B and enterprise companies to also partnership between business and government.
Yeah, I like that because, the model that's emerging is business can take the lead, the private sector can take the lead, but at some point you have to lobby and work on all these standards and rules to help industry. And the second subtext of what you guys are talking about, which is interesting, is that different countries will adopt different technologies and different standards. Perhaps, like in China, fintech might be more, due to financial inclusion, acceptable in terms of peer-to-peer lending. Other Western countries might be afraid of another crash. So you can actually use that to experiment and benefit. KK, there are a couple of themes that came up, which are, I know, very much in your wheelhouse. How do we deal with, if everything's connected, all this information, that's enabling all these things to happen, security and privacy, how do we deal with that?
No, I think just to bring on the topic of ecosystem, which is a very key thing. See, once you build an ecosystem, in our strategy, we identified 7 key ecosystem partners. 3 of them are here, correct? And we fundamentally believe that ecosystem is the way forward it is not a binary. It's all between the 1 and the 0, correct? The hybrid is a good example. Pragmatic AI is a great example. You need data to be solved before you even can start do AI and other stuff, because half the issues around how do you manage, and every time you think you want to centralize, as Sanjay talked about 5G, it's going to move everything down to the edge, right? Where is cloud in this conversation? It's going to get distributed significantly.
Yeah.
So, but now when you look at privacy and security, and I think there are two views to this. There is an enterprise view and there is a consumer view. And when you look at a consumer, the consumer could be a consumer, an employee, a business, an employee of another business, or even I would say machines now, smart machines connecting. They're also consumers of the whole experience and the data. I think, in my view, this is what I think is, and this is a lot of learnings from the EU, this thing. Privacy should be a user-controlled switch, which is me as an individual, me as an employee in an enterprise, based on privacy is all about you as an identity and how much of data you want to share and control and show. Security is what cybersecurity, and I think it's a responsibility of more of a bigger, the individuals can manage privacy and they can take care of what I call cyber essentials. And in yesterday's panel, I was talking about this thing that one of the base skills we need to teach people in this whole digital foundation and the digital quotient is cyber awareness. Because you need to be aware. You don't need to be an expert to fix it. At least privacy should be an individual play. Security, and I think in this thing, you need security at every level. Hardware, trusted platforms. Security at the network infrastructure, dynamic security and platforms, great endpoints. I think it's very, very important that you need to build, and we use this term called a digital foundation, correct? If you really look at this, you need a digital foundation on which you run a digital business and you operate on top of that. You wire your business on a foundation and then you slap your operations, it could be tech ops, business operations on top of that.
Yeah.
You don't have a proper foundation. It's like go back to basic civil engineering, correct? You don't get your infrastructure right. You don't make it flexible. You can't, people talk about rewiring businesses. You need to have the underlying pieces rewirable and pluggable. Security is a big, big issue. The worry we have is if you don't have standards and standards way to intercept, interrogate, or even engage with these platforms, you're going to create, one is you having a security loophole, other is you're not even being aware of what's happening, correct? And that's the bigger issue, which I think, so hence I would say both of them need to be balanced, but I think we need to give user more control of the privacy.
It's really interesting because there are, following from what you said, there are economists now working out. So security is one piece, and on the privacy part, there are economists who are working out what's the price of your data.
Yep.
Right now, you give it away for nearly free. You sign up for an account, on social media. But is it 20,000, 200,000, 2 million over a lifetime? And it may differ. And these are some interesting models we can play with. In that spirit, I want to shift gear a little bit. We've been nicely working through the different challenges. But I want to ask you, we've been talking about product and process innovation to come. What are the new business models that we're actually going to see? Because sometimes with product and process changes also come business models, especially when we think about what we do with data, but solving major problems like this. Any thoughts on this? Karen, let me start with you because you think about the customer a lot, I'm sure, and you advocate for the customer, and then I'll bring the others involved as well.
Yeah, what I think it's interesting when we talked all about the innovation that's happening in healthcare, financial services, there's not a single industry that isn't being disrupted and transformed, and technology playing a role in that. To me, the business model that I think is the most interesting, that I've heard a lot from customers that I've met, is this whole notion of how do I remain agile? How do I innovate? How do I teach the employee to think about the customer, to Sanjay's point? One of the biggest challenges that I have as chief customer officer at Dell is we sit at the total level and the integration of all of the experiences and all of the functions at Dell. The single biggest challenge that I have in enabling a true customer outcome is getting our leaders to stop thinking as a function. Mm-hmm. So when our customers want to buy from Dell, they don't come in and go, wow, I just want to talk to your services organization or your sales organization or your IT organization or your pre-sales organization. They're like, I want to talk to somebody who can help represent that experience and delivery end to end. So I actually think one of the fundamental business models that's going to change in the future is the way companies are organized, how they really think about customer centricity, innovation, agile, fail fast. These are all huge cultural challenges for big companies that for decades have been organized functionally, have been a bit risk adverse, honestly haven't really created a entrepreneurial kind of innovative capability across their particular companies. And that's what customers want today.
Is that going to lead to some sort of new, if organizations become more co-creative, collaborative, fluid in that sense as well, and organized differently, what will customers see of that? Will it be that they've got more fluid services and offerings? How will we see all that emerge? So, Karen, if you have any thoughts on that, and Thomas.
Well, I think one perfect example of that is, this as a service. I mean, everything as a service, right? Rent a house as a service, travel as a service, everything as a service, right? That's a huge, huge part of the growth and the expansion that we are seeing. So, and that came from direct customer feedback, right? Which is, look, my IT budgets are challenged. I can't continue to spend all this money on technology. I know that I need to refresh my infrastructure and the capabilities around it. Can't really afford all of that stuff. So how do you help me create a pay-as-you-go type of operating model?
Yeah.
Which I think is going to be, I know will be one of the operating models of the future. So if you think customer first, bring customers into it and ask them, what are the biggest challenges you're trying to solve?
Yeah.
It's amazing how you get away from a product-centric view to more of an outcomes, joint customer success, solutions type of view.
So I have a add-on to this, and completely, because we, as a company, we are going through this very interesting. We have a IT and business services segment. We've got an engineering where we work, and we all have a software ISV business. I see a very interesting mashup. Customers want service experience, but with productized offering. So it's a very interesting mix. They want product type predictability, product management, life cycle, release trains, but with the experience of a service. So when we start to have a conversation, I think the way I
give us an example of that, KK.
So we have a giant offering built between Dell Tech and VMware. It's an easier thing to understand. We have an offering called FlexSpace. It's basically built by taking device technology, bolting on with the Horizon stack from VMware, and creating a complete utility as part of digital workplace for a customer. The customer pays by a user. Now, these days, users carry multiple devices. Now, the customers are saying, I want persona-based consumption of digital workplace services across devices. Now, the device could be a Dell multifunction PC, which can fold up and become a tablet and all those things. Then you're to get an iPhone, then this. I want all of them to be managed seamlessly. But I'm going to pay you by an employee per month. And I want an XLA, not an SLA. So we have these two concepts nowadays. We do something called an experience level agreement and a service level agreement. The SLA is to make sure it's up, it's available. But then they're saying, I want to measure this so-called experience level agreement. And we suddenly starting, and we've got some small partners who we work with to measure it from a device and endpoint. But the customer expectation, I need white glove service, productized like a product. And then we're starting to see that the user experience is and expectations are very different. So I strongly believe that in the new ecosystem, and I think Sanjay pointed that ecosystem point out, for us, it's very important that what do you expect out of an upstream ecosystem and a downstream ecosystem? In customer conversations for us, they expect two things. Things they expect as utility and things they expect as outcome. So it's very important. For example, it's very unfair for me to go and tell Sanjay, I want to price VMware CPU licensing on outcome of a business process. That's what the conversation should happen is.
I'll take it as long as it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but he wants a lot of predictability because, which is very different than the way we could have a conversation by taking pieces of Qualtrics and start to deliver an experience measurement index service with an outcome, correct? Completely. So what we're starting to learn is that we have utilities So we've got brilliant utility model with VMware and Dell and a lot of other partners, infrastructure utility, platform utility, compute utility. You create consumption models. Then we start to create value, which is outcome-based, which is a service, which is an abstracted service on the top, where you're able to integrate the stack. So it's very important that the ecosystem model is we win together. It's not that I win and you lose or vice versa. That will break the ecosystem apart. So hence, it's very important that when you look at from a customer standpoint, outcome is certain things, utility is certain things. Certain processes could be utilities, functions could be utilities. And certain things you want to deliver as an outcome.
Thomas, now to you. New business models over the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, what we clearly, and I just can echo that actually, what we certainly will see, I mean, subscription is already here to stay. Consumption is everywhere already, driving adoption, so consumption-based business models. And I think what we certainly clearly see is also now that actually a lot of companies are coming to us and say, look, we have all this data now. What do we do with the data? Can we monetize data? So data-driven business models will be something. And I think this is still where companies struggle actually to do that. For sure, we're coming back to the challenges we talked about. For sure, can you use and how to use data? What are you allowed to do out of this data? Because is it, which you have in the systems, which is critical. And this is also something where I believe...
well, if you had no restrictions, what would you do with the data?
Quite frankly, I believe I'm very happy that we have a lot of restrictions with data. Because imagine, let's take SAP. I mean, we have all the big companies in the world, and we have the entire P&L and all of that stuff. It would be actually not good if we would not have restrictions. So I'm actually happy that we have GDPR and topics like that. But again, the challenge is, if we take healthcare, for instance, as one of the best examples, the problem with healthcare is that actually the medical doctors, they learn by experience doing multiple kind of sessions and learning from each patient. And they don't learn from the experience from other doctors at scale. So fundamentally, in the entire university, you have thousands of use case studies, and then you see a picture and you know, okay, here's something with the lungs, because you recognize it. For sure, in a real, if we could use all patient data on a global scale with thousands of doctors can learn again with AI to analyze it better, for sure that would help and improve the world. But again, this is one of the challenges. The technology is there, but that it would have another topic, and we talked about hybrid cloud and cloud as one of the things. I mean, what everybody also needs to acknowledge, I mean, the cloud is not global. Let's be truth about it. I mean, we have all the regulations around the globe, which is giving, again, a challenge about where the data is stored, which data then you can combine, which means the notion around data-driven business models is super complex. I believe that will be a huge benefit, and everybody who has the right ideas will flourish, because those business models are what the consumers expect, actually. But you wanted to talk about challenges, and I believe the regulations around the globe, which are going more and more national, what we see, the different data protection rules, they certainly also makes it sometimes a challenge to even further advance with the technology which is available.
And that's where that influence, led by private sector but beyond, is important. Sanjay, I want to ask you the same question, but with a twist, because you looked at the past. So all these great things, we're assuming that all these wonderful big companies, established players are going to do all this. But in the past, we've had startups play an important role, or at least new players. I mean, play an important role in driving some of these things. So what are your thoughts on that whole ecosystem, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, helping to drive some of these things? And what's the relationship with the legacy or the established incumbents?
I think we can and should welcome it. I mean, there was a day when SAP was an incumbent, disrupting IBM's view of accounting systems. And that's how Hasso and Dietmar Hopp started that company. And that business model of buy a big mainframe and do accounting in a very old, with lots of labor, got challenged by them. The entire way in which you build data centers was by lots and lots of servers. When VMware first came out, all the companies that today that are our biggest friends fought us, including Intel, because why would you want to have something to virtualize it? Because it's ruining our chip business. It's ruining our server business. Then they all embraced it. So all of us were startups one day. When Michael started the company, people didn't believe there was going to be a personal computer in every home. Okay? This was, when he was a 19-year-old at UT Austin. So we have to, as bigger companies now, we're all bigger, we have to ask ourselves, which is that startup that we can learn from that's going to potentially disrupt us? If you don't live with that hunger and that sense that you could be disrupted, you will get disrupted. That's just the laws. So Amazon Web Services, incredible what they have done to basically take what is an entire stack of infrastructure and create a $35 billion software economy inside inside a retail company. It's amazing and Andy was a classmate of mine in business school.
Yeah.
I was good friends with him, but I had no idea. And he had no idea at the time that this is what he would be doing. But it's amazing. So watching that, all of us are learning now, how does software move to an as a service? Much of them talk about, so I won't repeat their comments. But we have to change where I suspect a significant part of software, as it moves to our cloud, ask ourselves, listen, don't fight it, embrace it.
Yeah.
If it stays on premise, I think Dell and us share this view. I think hardware and software come much closer together as opposed to pulled apart. You don't buy a car and then buy a whole bunch of add-on services. You buy the car and it's all there at the same time. So more that hardware and software is brought together, we save that experience. And then I think the part that I'm most intrigued by, and I'll kind of close with this model, I'm very intrigued by business models that are either completely outcome-based. Mm-hmm. In other words, I'm not going to pay you anything until I see the result, which none of us would like, because that's a tough model for us to adopt. But will that start to take on? Or business models that are completely capped. Eat as much as you want, but there's a cap, and you can never go above that. And you take Amazon Prime, right? You pay me a monthly subscription, but you can no payment for shipping. You can watch as many videos as you want. Things of those kinds, as they come into our world of B2B, are going to be disruptive to us, but we're going to have to find ways by which we embrace it.
And I think to add to that point is actually, and that's also coming back to the beginning of all the change we see in the agility, as you mentioned, which is required. Actually, every company needs to reinvent itself way quickly. I mean, SAP reinvented itself also now a couple of times. We need to, otherwise we would diminish. You see other companies like Microsoft and all the others, how companies need to disrupt themselves. And as Sanjay mentioned, you need to watch out how the consumer and customer base, what's the expectation, new ideas, and you need to embrace them. And that's what we will see even more in the future. And the speed of change and how you need to agile adjust on this is getting higher. And you will see that the most successful companies on earth will be the companies who fundamentally are able to disrupt themselves and in an agile fashion change to new consumer expectations. And again, take the 1 trillion companies we have today. All of them do that in a regular basis, and that's a proof of success. Yeah.
Any short comments on this, Karen and KK, and then I'll open it up to some Q&A from the audience.
I would just add one. About a year or so ago, we started to really do some real kind of outside-in thinking around what's the future of customer experience across Dell Technologies. And we went out and benchmarked with a lot of leading B2B companies in tech, outside of tech, and all of those areas. This theme around customer success, joint accountability to true outcomes that customers really want. I know everybody thinks data scientist is the, fastest growing kind of job that's out there. I'm telling you, go look at this customer success side of it. VMware has been doing this for quite some time, and we're learning a lot from them. But it is where this XLA, this customer outcomes, where you can really differentiate yourself from some of the more legacy, traditional providers that are out there. And you talk about creating some real stickiness with customers. You get in a room with them and figure out, how does what we do for you help you look great in front of your board of directors with your CEO, and all of that is the next horizon around where experience is going.
KK, any thoughts on this?
I think on the skill point, correct, I think there is this whole hype factor on some of this front cool skills. I'm telling you, find me a VCDX. He's worth more than a data scientist. Seriously, I'm telling you. So I think the fact is that you'll find a lot of data scientists now, but you can't find a VCDX so easily. And I think the demand is that when you start doing things like SDN and the world is inverting, correct, in the skill matrix. Infrastructure is becoming programmable, software is becoming composable. You need composing capability up and you need programming capability down. It's completely the other way in this industry. You needed programming on the top and you needed infrastructure engineering down below. The whole world is flipped over completely, and that's a big, big change. The key is that what we've learned, because from our perspective, we've built a company and we're evolving and we're continuously evolving. We took a decision like 20 years back as a company when we went into ITO, that we will do device-based pricing, managed services. We took an MSP model and took it into a global ITO space and disrupted the classic ITO model. We learned the customer wants predictability for managing a desktop, a device, a network, a server, an application runtime. So we created a pricing model which was fixed price, output-based, not outcome. So there's an output-based pricing model. Then we realized customers said, I want flex utility. You don't need to, people have this wrong view that utility is public cloud, correct? You can get utility in different models. We've got a very successful utility model running into hundreds of millions with large enterprise customers with Dell and VMware, and we have an SAP utility, by the way. We've taken SAP on top of all this stack and created an infrastructure.
Sure, you told us, yeah.
The third model we've got is as a company, we do a lot of R&D outsourced, joint R&D, risk reward with a lot of partners here. We've got risk reward models where product engineering, where we're investing is based on the revenue of the product which they are generating as a percentage, which means now we are taking models which is taking high-end risk, and we've done this with airline manufacturers and auto and with software companies, correct?
Yeah.
The fourth is customers wanting outcome, which is what Sanjay said. It's very hard because even the buyer has to be mature enough to define what is outcome. See, even though if we want to deliver an outcome-based model, the buyer has to figure out how they would convince it back, because the CFO, everyone needs to get involved, because they still want to measure it on a utility model, but one outcome doesn't work.
Sure.
So I think the industry will evolve through this, but I think we are in a very interesting phase.
But there are two important, the underlying themes of all the comments that were made, there are two important things. One is, with all these technologies and all the changes we need to make, it's not possible for anyone to do it on their own, so you need to have this ecosystem of partners, right? There is a nuanced difference, though, now from earlier, which came out, which is that earlier we used to think about the disruptor as purely a threat, in the sense that they will come in and really displace you, the incumbent, right? Now, though, we can almost think about a symbiotic relationship, because if you look at healthcare, if you look at driverless cars, if you look at climate change, these big problems that we see are opportunities, fintech, et cetera, there are skills and advantages that each of the respective players brings to the table, So coming together allows us to leverage and harness both of those to make this happen. All right, wonderful. Let's take a question or two from the audience. Gentleman in the front. Thank you.
Hi, Krishna Kumar with Duke Health in the U.S. Thank you all for a fascinating conversation. I want to delve a bit deeper into this idea of inequality. We've talked about sustainability as more of an emphasis, and we've hit on this idea of leapfrogging as a way to actually democratize and create more equality, perhaps, through technology. But what we see predominantly is that the application of technology, when it's not intended or done in an intentional way, tends to exacerbate inequalities, and we've seen that play out and lead to some of the cultural challenges we have. How do you all think about the application of technologies and innovations, whether through business models or the way you interact with customers and the way they're applied, as ways that we can create more equality, not less?
I'll start with, go ahead, Karen. After you.
Because you hit on a huge passion area of mine, which is around gender equality. I think it's really interesting that the shift that I have seen around this whole discussion around diversity and inclusion has shifted from the so-called right thing to do to it's now business imperative. And in many CEOs' minds, I think, and CFOs' minds, by the way, because they were one of the naysayers, is this light bulb that went off as a result of the war on talent. You can't find enough people in tech. By 2024, there will be 1.1 million open technology roles in the United States alone, another 450,000 here across Europe. And only 45% of those jobs can be filled by the existing talent pool. So if we do not figure out how to incentivize companies and organizations to broaden the talent pool, you're just simply not going to be able to deliver on a lot of the technology, a lot of the business outcomes that corporations want to do. So what are we doing about that? We've done similar things that other companies have done. We've set big, lofty goals, not just at the overall level, but also at a leadership level. We've set those goals around gender, around women. We've set them around African Americans. We have set them around Hispanics. We have created programs, re-entry programs, where women who have left the workforce or women who have graduated with a degree in STEM are now kind of re-entering the workforce. 70% of the women that graduate in a STEM-related field from universities are not going into STEM-related jobs. Mm-hmm. And so we need to figure out, how do you find that talent? How do you create the incentives and everything for them to come? And then the other thing that I think that technology has enabled that we have been doing at Dell now for well over a decade is work from home, flexibility. I mean, people, this is a male and female comment. They don't want to be tied to their offices. They want to work wherever they want to work. And technology today is enabling that ability to work from wherever you want to work, segregate the data based on your persona and where you're at any particular point in time. So I think technology can play a huge role in helping some of the imbalances that have been happening.
Sanjay, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I think, listen, everything Karen said, we also feel the gender equality part has to be solved in tech. Women are 50% of the workforce, but technology, we've done a pathetic job. They're only 25 to 30, and even the best company, I think, is like 30%. So, if I'm going to make VMware an attractive place for my 13-year-old daughter to work, she's not going to look at it today and say that's a place she wants to work. It's like, hey, it's so male-dominated. And we have to work progressively with incentives that allow from the top to the leaf level to change those fundamentally. So I endorse everything Karen said. I think there's another part, there's two other points of equality that I'm passionate about. One is, listen, for many of you who have probably stories similar to mine, I grew up in a poor home. And for me, education was the path to doing more. And that's the grand equalizer. I mean, there's no dispensation on you can study or work hard just because you're rich. I mean, there's plenty of stories like mine who are poor, who education helped them, and they just worked hard and education got them out. And I think that when I look at how education is being revolutionized by technology, the Khan Academy is doing incredible work, which is turning the upside down of schools. And, facilitated by YouTube, a variety of other things, you don't have to go to a wealthy prep school. You can study as much about the basics of STEM. And I'm passionate to see every person whose parent wasn't as educated, the next generation say, listen, I'm going to go to college, go to high school, go to college, and education's my path. And that should be something that's a grand equalizer. The other part to me that's a tough one, I don't have an answer, but something that we are really wrestling with in Silicon Valley is housing disparity. It's incredibly bad in San Francisco. San Jose is following pretty closely behind, and then city after city in the United States is just becoming worse. And it's largely because of the disparity in the wealth. And then, and we've got to find ways by which, as those who've been successful now, aren't allowing these cities to become places where homelessness is, I don't have the answer. There's a combination of corporate working with the government. Is it taxes? I don't know. And many of them are controversial answers, but it's something we have to solve because the problem is getting extremely acute. Now, I grew up in a situation in India where I watched a lot of homeless and poverty, but you would assume as a country gets better and better in their economic progress, the tide lifts everyone's boats. And it's sad when I walk into cities now, it seems to be the opposite. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and homelessness now is getting worse. And those are two, and I could go on and on, but those are two examples of where I hope that technology can help. The first one I have an answer, which is education. Yeah. Second one, I don't have an answer. Still thinking through it.
And just quick comment, from an HCL standpoint, a vision of our chairman, I think we run a program called Tech Bees, where we've gone to tier 3 cities, taken high school graduates, and we created a dual degree program, which is with the BITS Pilani University off campus, but they're integrated into HCL. We are absorbing them into managed services, a lot of the scale roles, and we're grooming them up. But rather than spending 4 years in university, getting them again and training them, we're starting them from high school, creating an education path program, and trying to bridge that gap in cities where, because one of the challenges we have in some emerging markets, and even trying to do that in the US and Europe, is everyone wants to come to the big city to work. So could we take the work back to a tier 3 city or a second tier city? It's like we just have a big center now in Lithuania. We've just gone in Europe. We are in Gothenburg. We're going to not the big cities, but off to the other cities where you can move the work there. So the talent congregates there. Same thing in India. We're going to towns like Madurai and Nagpur and Lucknow, rather than bringing everyone into those 4 big metros and clogging it off, and the same problem happens. Yep.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time, so we'll have one quick final question with very brief answers, whoever answers, and then I'll wrap up the panel, okay?
He's telling us. That's really to us, not to you. He's telling us to be brief. We got the message. Good. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Tabitha from OneWeb. Thanks for a fantastic panel, actually. I have to say, I love the quote about predicting the future is to create the future.
There you go, Tom.
One of the things I wanted to
It's
ask...
also stolen.
It's good, it's a great quote. I wanted to ask you about software, the cloud, hybrid cloud, all of that presumes really good, high-quality internet access for businesses all the way around the world. In more wider geographies, this is another equality point, I think. So what I hope that we might look back at in a couple of years is a defining moment of by 2030 is equal access to the internet everywhere to enable businesses to use all of this great technology. OneWeb is an internet from space company. We're creating a constellation of satellites to create internet from space. And I wondered about what you guys thought about that and that kind of technology.
Just a quick from my side. I fully agree. In the end of the day, we need to ensure that everywhere in the world we have the access to the data and the information in the internet. So I fully agree. I just was yesterday on a panel also with Verizon and the others, and the stats was actually interesting. I mean, we have 7.5 billion people on this planet, and actually still, more than 3 billion don't have access. And this is something where, to your point, and I mentioned it also at the beginning, education will be the key. And I fundamentally believe that the internet will be one of the sources of knowledge and education in the future. And to touch equality in the world, we need this. And I fully agree with that. That's super important for us as that we really ensure that basically everybody has access to this information and with that can, work on this topic. So
I still take optimism in this because if you go back to even like a good example in India, telecom, you look at the connectivity, like half of the country is connected. If you go 15 years back, to get a phone line 20 years back was like you had to be on a queue, correct? I think that whole mobile internet, and I think it's changing. But you're right, it needs to scale, and I think it has to be a public-private, and I think some of the comments Sanjay made earlier on 5G. I think the more and more the whole stack gets softwareized, you always need to stick radio antennas rather than doing more of them. And I think there is a big opportunity which exists, and this has to continue to happen because connectivity is the fundamental, I would say it's going to become a fundamental right. You need to have connectivity to do anything else, and equal connectivity is going to be very, very important. But it's still a lot of work to do, but I think collectively the whole industry is walking towards that.
I know that there are more questions, but you'll have an opportunity to interact with our panelists afterwards. As a good academic, I can't help but now summarize the panel with a few takeaways. So that's why I needed that extra minute or two. But, I'm really struck. I'm very happy to hear such optimism. Basically, one of the messages I got is that the technologies are there, at least they're advanced enough. We now need to work on truly translating those into the actual innovations that will make a difference in terms of solving major problems and tackle them. Well, what does that entail? It's not so much the technology part, it's the strategy, the organization, it's the regulatory side, it's managing talent, it's managing these issues like security and privacy. Even those can be overcome. What's really important there is two things, I think. One, in order to keep up with the knowledge, we need to do this as a partnership collaboratively. And I think that's what's very, very important there. That's why this symbiotic relationship between new entrants as well as established players is really critical. But the other piece is we need to align incentives. Aligning incentives, not just within companies, between different players, but also with governments, for example, will help us to accelerate some of these developments and allow us to see the benefits. The final thing I'll just say is that the great news is sometimes when you think about the world's challenges, they seem insurmountable. But if you look at history, and especially the world that we live in, it just requires a catalyst. Something, then just one model works, and then it spreads like wildfire. That's definitely true today. Things go viral. So if we think about problems in a smaller way like that and really light that fire, well, maybe that's a bad example to use actually right now. Just plant a seed and catalyze things, then we'll be able to make progress. With that, I want to say thank you so much to our panelists for a very engaging discussion and all of you for your participation.